this is the next in a series of town hall discussions that we're having here in the town of Orangeville. This month is National Indigenous History Month, and joining us today we have Councillor Joe Andrews. Joe, thank you. We have Debbie Sipkema, who's with the Dufferin County Cultural Resource Circle, and also we have Elder Shelley Charles joining us to discuss all matters with respect to Indigenous people. And you know, this month has been a real focus on racism coming out of the anti-Black treatment of residents in the United States, particularly by police, and it's caused a lot of focus on that, but also on racism in general. And of course, unfortunately, our Indigenous people have suffered that over hundreds of years now. And so we just wanted to get you folks together, talk openly about this, and also just announce and celebrate this month for National Indigenous History Month and National Aboriginal Day, which is coming up on June 21st. So maybe we could just start off with maybe each of us making a couple short statements about what our feelings are about racism in general in Canada. And Debbie, do you want to start off maybe? And just a couple minutes. I don't want to get too deep into it right now. We'll get in deeper shortly, but it's really unfortunate what's going on right now, and but it's shining a light, and it's
Absolutely.
a needed light to be shone on society in general.
Absolutely.
So go ahead, Dan.
As we look at the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests, the walks, not protests. What you're looking at also in that same period, which went under all the radar of the all the news, is 8 Indigenous people were also killed in that same time frame.
Right. Yeah.
And
very unfortunate.
That got missed, right? And there's a chief in Alberta who had been beaten by an RCMP officer because he was getting a little mouthy. But I mean, all the chief was saying was that he got tired of all the police constantly harassing the people for whatever, and he had a really a valid point to it, right?
Of course he did. Yeah, that was a terrible video. It's interesting. Some of these incidents that have happened, if they'd happened 20 years ago, and they wouldn't have come to our attention. They wouldn't have come to our attention. Even that terrible thing that happened in Minneapolis, if it had been 20 years ago, those 4 officers would have written up exactly the same report, and it would have been, the person died in custody, and that would have been the end of it. There would have been no focus on it because they would have buried it. They would have buried it. And this incident that was caught on video with that chief in Alberta, I mean, that was horrific. And thank heavens for the dash cam or the individual that taped that, because
has the police dash cams.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move along to Elder Shelley. Elder Shelley, can you weigh in on some of this, and what are your thoughts? I mean, you've been watching all your life, and I'm very interested to hear about your thoughts right now.
Well, I think that in terms of the public gatherings across the U.S., the gatherings around Black Lives Matter has also prompted Indigenous people in Canada to stand up. And while we have been standing up for the water, the missing and murdered Indigenous women, and I think that we've come to a place where we've realized that history is repeating itself. So something like this happened back in 1967, as some of us may remember, and that took place in New York. And at the same time that those riots were happening there, here in Canada, we still had to get permission to leave the reservation communities. And so the racism was there then. It's evolved now, and we're really lucky that we do have social media and that we have phones, because it can't be hidden anymore. And so much of the racism that's happening, and that's been happening recently against Indigenous people, it hasn't been recorded. But I think that as people, we're beginning to understand how powerful how powerful that medium is.
Mm-hmm. It certainly has shone a light on this. I also wanted to ask you about, the proper training of police officers, and maybe it seemed in those two incidents that instead of de-escalating, that the thing got escalated by those officers. And I can't help but think there needs to be a greater focus on training, because again, we think of both of those incidents. Apparently one was a counterfeit bill passed and the other was a license plate infraction. And for them to be escalated into assault, and in one case murder, is, you have to lay that at the feet of the police. And I think this is, people are saying, what's an old white guy going to do about this? Well, both Joe and I, we sit in this position of authority now in our municipal government. I think we collectively need to reach out to our, the provincial and federal officials, and we need to really change the way things are done. And substance abuse and mental health issues are at the root of a lot of police calls, and I don't think that police generally have the training on social welfare issues and cultural issues to de-escalate. And again, I want to talk briefly about the incident that happened in Atlanta last Friday night, where the gentleman was killed at the Wendy's drive-thru in Atlanta, and that situation should have been de-escalated. Those police officers, in my mind, could have said to this gentleman, look, we're going to give you a ticket, whatever the ticket would be. You're not going to take your car home. It's going to sit here till tomorrow morning, and you're going to take an Uber home, and that would have been the end of it. But for some reason, they created this, situation that should never have happened, and that's where the training has to come in. But
that would have been the civil approach there.
Yeah,
Sandy. And unfortunately, it wasn't applied, and
No,
I think that's one of the challenges we have within the policing service today is the education side. Just to jump in very quickly, and again, I know that with the utmost respect of our guests that we have here today, because I'm here to listen and learn. Participating in the Black Lives Matter march walk wasn't a protest. I was absolutely elated to see how well organized that particular event in Orangeville was put together on Sunday. To also respect our Indigenous heritage, our Indigenous people, I was so pleased to hear the embracement of the organizers to identify the historic issues. And when I speak from the heart, with no official connection to our Indigenous people, but other than to learn, find some understanding, and provide support in whatever method I can. I know I can't change what was, but what I can do is I hope that we can find some way of changing the activities that we need to moving forward. So, I'm here to listen to Elder Charles and also to Debbie, and to hopefully get some answers to some of the questions that you're posing to this afternoon, Sandy.
Great. So I want to touch.
One of the things.
Yeah, go ahead, Shelley. Yeah.
I just wanted to respond to your point about what happened in Alabama, the situation down there. We had a similar situation in the East Coast, in the Woodstock area, where a Native woman, was shot 5 times. And of course, that's under investigation right now. And you're so right when you're talking about mental health issues and addictions. We really need to look at the training that's available for our police, our OPP, our RCMP, and in particular, it's an opportunity for us to look at the post-secondary education, which includes the police foundations programs and training. Because what I've been seeing with the OPP and also with the selection of officers is that the notion of cultural awareness or cultural sensitivity, however that rolls out, it comes off as a one-off sort of teaching opportunity rather than something that's consistent. And when I think about consistency, I also, and I'm glad you brought this up, Mayor Brown, because I was thinking about the whole selection process for police officers.
Yeah.
My experience with that selection process is generally they bring in retired sergeants, and there's a huge interview process that takes several years. They check the background of the individuals that they're, wanting to bring up under the police forces. But I'm just thinking that I really wonder how many Indigenous people are on those selection panels, because there would be specific questions asked around how do you deal with the domestic abuse situation in an Indigenous community. So the reason why I mentioned that, and I'll just end with this. What happened after that shooting out east and the killing of that woman? She was shot 5 times. Native people responded very differently than the response south of the border in the U.S. What the people did on the East Coast, our relatives, they gathered together in silence and they did a jingle dress dance. They were standing there after hundreds of years of racism, discrimination, abuse on all fronts. There were our women standing there in the front, just all we could hear were their jingles. Their jingles on their dress represent healing. And this time that we're in right now, this month of June, is like that's a month where we celebrate the resiliency of the people and our ability to keep trying to educate in a really positive way.
Right. There's a couple things that we need to do, I think, Elder Shelley, and one is I think we need to reach out to the Minister of Education, not only in this province but in other provinces, to start to add to the curriculum and make sure that life skills are taught to children, because when we're born, there's no racism in our running through our veins. It's a taught and it's through the experience, and you're a product of your environment. So if our teachers can be pushing back against generational racism that somebody might be experiencing, then you can change the course of that person's thoughts, I think. And I think we really need to spend more time on life skills in the junior, elementary and high schools. And I hope that maybe Councillor Joe and I can maybe craft some wording that we can send out to our Minister of Education to think more seriously about these. I know they touch upon these things, but I think it needs to be a deeper thought process in teaching to children. And you did touch upon, having Indigenous people, involved in selection processes. Phil Dewar, who is a Black member of our community, sat with us a week ago today, prior to the Black Lives Matter meeting, and the police chief was in that meeting, and Phil asked the police chief about the demographic makeup of the police force in Orangeville. And, you know, it's I think exclusively white in our town. You know, does that, and should that represent, should our police force not be more representative of the cultural and racial dynamic of our town? And so Phil made a very good point, and coming off of that, we're going to be sending a letter through the Police Services Board to the OPP, who's coming into our town in October, that as they populate the detachment with the complement of officers, that they look at, you know, Black, Indigenous, South Asian, maybe Filipino. There's a number of strong communities in Orangeville, and we need a bit of a better cultural and racial makeup in that. So, Joe, I don't know, do you feel the same way as I do on that?
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you, Sandy. I think that, you know, what you've touched upon is really the importance of ensuring that the education starts early. As Elder Shelley has pointed out, that, you know, some of the discrepancies, and there are significant discrepancies across the country when it comes to police hiring. What I do want to say about the opportunity to share the message to elementary and secondary, that is important. By the time it gets into the post-secondary side, and again, you know, my experience is that, you know, we can provide some teaching, but it is the ability to implement. And you know, Elder Shelley is very, very accurate when it comes to the hiring process. What I am pleased to say that what I am noticing is the slow but very important inclusion. Peel Region Police, for example, is one police force in the province and the country that has been very good. Not great, but they've been very good at, in fact, processing an interview process that is, I think, appropriate. Still much to be learned, and I think that you know, what you've shared, Your Worship, is very accurate. I'd be happy to assist in drafting some messaging, but I do want to hear what Elder Shelley has to say, and also what Debbie has to say too.
Yeah. I've got in front of me here the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls to action. 94 items here. I'm wondering if I could ask, you know, Debbie and Shelley, how can, you know, how many of those really are things that our municipality can act on? And Debbie, you live here, you've lived here for many years. What additional things do you think that our council can do to help shore up the results of this Truth and Reconciliation Commission? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to start by thanking you for meeting two of those obligations, just by having the medicine wheel garden and the permanent flagpole down at Alder Arena. That met with both 61 and 62. So I had a chance to meet with Senator Sinclair, who was part of the commission.
Yeah.
What a great guy he is. He's absolutely.
Is that Murray Sinclair? Senator
Yes.
Murray Sinclair? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good.
He told us, I was actually at Humber down in Etobicoke, I think. But what he said was, find the thing that resonates and build on that.
Right.
So when council is looking at that 94 recommendations, find what resonates with the town, and that's what you need to build on. You also have got some great suggestions within the Municipal Act itself, the book you guys all get that's like 100 million pages long. There is a section in there for municipalities working directly with the Indigenous community, and that's something you can look at and figure out how to apply it where we are. I think if you want a good place to kind of emulate in this, you want to look at Markham. Because Markham has got has done incredible work for, and Elder Shelley, if you don't agree, you may know somebody else, but Markham had, and it's only a small little town of its own, right? And they have adopted a northern community, and
Okay.
they financially help the community, but they also bring the community back. It becomes like a sister community, and they fly the people from that community to participate. And the town of Markham runs the Indigenous Peoples Day. They fund the entire process, and they bring these people down to help bring that along. And I think I know right now, when we're looking at COVID-19, every municipality is going to be struggling, but we're not having half the struggle that the northern communities are having through all of this.
Yeah.
And I think if we can partner and work with community, we're going to be a lot better off.
Yeah, good suggestion, Debbie. I like that idea of partnering with the northern community. And Joe, we should look into that. I think that's an excellent idea. You know, I've seen exchanges of athletes, you know, from northern communities, and you know,
exactly.
and ways to help those communities and the children and the youth of those communities. So we need to look at that. That's very good. Elder Shelley, you know, you've got a lot of experience in these matters, so here's a chance. You got a couple of elected officials here. What do you think that, you know, we should focus on, and what can we do to help bridge the gap and you know, make you know, Indigenous lives better? Have you got some thoughts on that?
I do. I wish you'd have sent that to me so I could have given it more thought. But
I'm sorry.
If we go back to your really relevant point about the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, and also, you know, acknowledging we have hosted Senator Murray Sinclair before he started the commission, and then we had him back to share with us at Humber College what his findings were. And while, yes, one of his messages was there's 94 recommendations, there's no expectation that we can be everything to everybody, but what he said was pick one and do it well. So pick one thing at a time. Mm-hmm. So when I think about that, and I think about your question in relation to the town, I've identified 7 areas that would be a good place to start. Well, together we've identified education. Right. So education as reconciliation, that's in relation to our local policing, but I think also to our administration and our politicians. And that sort of education around reconciliation can be a very positive experience. People today are really focusing on sort of the evolution of current events, but also in engaging in a good way. So there's a new way of teaching Indigenous awareness. So that would be one area. Also in the area of justice, of course, perhaps our local town, I think it's a magistrate. You have to correct me. They would also require some training, Indigenous, we call it, it's not Indigenous awareness anymore. I just blanked out there. And if we could focus on sports as well, sports, media is a big thing. Media could be as simple as having Indigenous people in posters. It could be as simple as including Indigenous symbols in celebrations. Also, and our hiring practices. I know that for a fact that across this province, we don't really have a dedicated HR policy or protocol for hiring of Indigenous people. And I think if you wanted to do something that was innovative, and if you wanted to sort of set the bar for moving forward, that might be something that's really, really easily doable, which is, you know, design a protocol for the inclusion, but also for the selection of Indigenous people onto staff And also onto council. It's a very new area, and people are just starting to realize they're starting to realize the impact of seeing such a diverse group of people doing the work. The results can be, it increases our ability to respect each other's work, to respect Joe's work, to respect Deb's work, and it really, this whole new dynamic starts. And some people will say, well, there's not that many Native some people will say there's not that many Native people in your community. Well, that's not the issue. The issue is diversity, and to be able to see what that looks like.
Right. Well, I know both of you were part of, and Joe was as well, in town council here embracing land acknowledgement, which has happened in this council term, and I think we're quite proud of that. We're very happy to be making that statement at each of our council meetings. And thank you. I think Joe reached out to Shelley and Debbie as we crafted that. Apparently it was difficult because in our geography here, a lot of overlay of various Indigenous peoples over the centuries. But I hope we got it right now, and I'm very glad that we're making those statements during our council meeting. So that was a positive in this council term. Of course, the medicine wheel is a beautiful tribute, I think, to the Indigenous peoples, and I'm glad it's there, and we need to keep building on that. And I think when Bravery Park finally gets built, that whole area will become an area for education. It's very close to two schools, a high school and a public school, and I can see teachers bringing their classes out for a teaching moment at both the Medicine Wheel and the Bravery Park to talk about history of our veterans, and also history of our Indigenous people. So I think it's really a positive thing. So that's really, some good things are happening, and we need to continue to build on this. When I remember back about 20 years ago when I was working, there was a term that was introduced in the company I worked in, and it was introduced by Toyota, who became one of our clients, and it was Kaizen. Kaizen being a Japanese term for continuous improvement. And I think we all need to embrace that idea of continuous improvement, and slowly but surely we'll get we'll get to the right spot here. We talked about racism in housing, racism in employment, and those two things are real, and they're happening right now. Not just Indigenous people, South Asians, Black people are experiencing those types of racism and discrimination right now. And I'm a residential landlord myself, and I can only say to other residential landlords, if you're not able to uphold the laws in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, then maybe you should get out of that business, because there's other people that are embracing fairness, and somebody's name or the color of their skin is not something that we can use to identify their ability to pay rent, right? I mean, it's something that we have to correct, and we'll keep working on it, but it's there. It's currently there right now. So I wanted to, Debbie, maybe you can talk about, you mentioned a couple things there, but we had on our list here continuing collaboration and partnership. So you mentioned maybe creating a partnership with a northern community. I love that idea. I think that's really, anything else you can think of?
Well, these partnership, just continuing with what we've been doing with council, trying to get a proper space so that we can have a spot for the Indigenous community to gather, because without a single space, it's very difficult. And Indigenous people like to get together. It's really really a big thing. I mean, it's like everybody else, right? You like to get together and have a good time and drink tea or whatever.
Sure.
Now, also in the reciprocal aspect of it, by doing it this way, the Indigenous community is also bringing in tourism and fund and dollars to the town as well by doing, just by us having our gatherings and being able to have a space or a spot where people can go and see artifacts that aren't available in this area right now, or go and we can have Indigenous artists have their work displayed, because there's some amazing artists out there, and we have a couple of great carvers who are Indigenous people here in Orangeville.
Right.
And,
well, you'll be interested to know that some of the discussion that's going on right now, Debbie, on closing of Broadway, is also talking about maybe, backing off on Broadway, but closing Mill Street on Saturdays and creating an arts and crafts type festival where local artisans, crafters, artists can display their wares. So there might be an opportunity this summer for that to happen. So I think keep your eyes and ears on that one. I'd like to see that happen, and certainly the Indigenous people need to be represented in that as well. So,
Shelley, do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, I do actually. Thanks for asking. When I think about partnerships today, and in the light of the isolation and the pandemic that we've all had to deal with, and we've all had to, our lives have changed. Our lives will never be the same again. I think about partnership. I think about mental health and wellness. And if there's something that could be done immediately, would be to look into the local services that we have now, perhaps increase partnerships or outreach with our churches, with our community churches. There's a huge backlog of requests from elders and ministers for assistance. And we, as elders and ministers, we do counseling, but not the same sort of counseling that, say, for example, somebody at CAMH would do. Our collective mental health issues, whatever color or community we're from, are skyrocketing from isolation. And for Indigenous communities, it's for us being, we weren't. I have several grandchildren, and it was a really confronting time for me not to see them, protecting them and them protecting me. But it also was an opportunity for me to work with my oldest grandson in teaching on the land. So if we can create those opportunities for outdoor celebration like you were talking about, perhaps build an arbor, and an arbor will cast, shade. It would be a nice place in the future for all people to gather. It could be an Indigenous designed arbor, and that would be a great partnership as well. And finally, for the DCCRC, the reality of it is that the organization really needs help with the employment and potential training positions. I think that if the town could invest more into the organization, I think that we would see a more inclusive approach. We would see more celebrations, but also, and most importantly, we would see more Indigenous people self-identify in the community, because we know without a doubt that they're there. We know that Indigenous people come from mixed families, Scottish, Irish, myself is French and Ojibwe and Seneca. We know they're there. And if we can continue on with these positive moves, for example, the land acknowledgement That was a really big move, because there are some municipalities that don't want to do it. So that was really appreciated by the town of Orangeville to ensure that that was completed. So those are the things that I wanted to add. And, you know, we're really concerned about our collective wellness, and that teachings on the land, education on the land is really medicine for all people. And if we can create those environments, then it really helps everyone. And when you talk about, you mentioned the 4 direction symbol, maybe we could have a talk in the future, or we could do a taping about what that means, because there's so much misunderstanding about it. And that symbol in of itself is a symbol of unity. And in that unity, it's all people are equal. Each quadrant is equal. There's none that are bigger or lesser than the other, and they all come together, and the circle is continuous. It's continually building.
Yeah, part of Shelley, sorry to interrupt, but part of the Black Lives Matter ceremony, a woman named Sarah Ritchie performed, you know, some smudging, and did speak to the 4 directions of the medicine wheel. I thought she did a very nice job of explaining that part of Indigenous culture to the gathering. She did a very nice job there. But when you speak, it makes me think we should do one of these things live at the medicine wheel. Maybe have musicians there as well, and put on another 45-minute or 60-minute program where we can get deeper into it there. I also wanted to share, we passed a motion at our last council meeting to send a letter to Solicitor General Sylvia Jones, really to reinforce, I'm sure what she's trying to do now, but about training of police officers, about neck restraints, and making sure that police officers are trained properly, and working on de-escalation. And I was in a meeting this afternoon before this meeting with our town clerk about finalizing that letter, which town council has endorsed and we're sending off. But I also wanted to add another letter to Minister of Health Christine Elliott and to Sylvia Jones, for them to collaborate more in setting up crisis response teams for mental health and substance abuse crisis. God bless our police officers. They're in very difficult situations, but sometimes they don't have the training on the social worker side. And this is happening in other parts of our province. Absolutely. Where a police officer is partnered up with a social worker, and they go out for crisis intervention when they know it's a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue. And we have to start thinking about substance abuse as a medical condition and not criminality. And that's really something important that we have to embrace and work on. So I'd like, Joel, if I'm going to bring it up on Monday, our next meeting, but I think we need to send another letter out to both the Minister of Health and the Solicitor General to work on somehow making this kind of crisis intervention team a standard within police forces across the province and maybe across Canada. It's really an important thing.
I do agree there with your points, Your Worship, and I think as Elder Shelley has highlighted some of the key action points that we can end up looking at. I think the embracement, we've spoken about education almost throughout this particular dialogue here in different ways. The education of history, how we can end up ensuring that we move forward in a positive way. But I think as we have the opportunity in our particular capacity to communicate to those that can make the changes that are necessary, I feel that this is a conduit for us to utilize. with, of course, appropriate input. And I think the input that we've received today is sending a message that is very loud and clear, and we have to act on this as quickly as possible.
Debbie, you were about to say something there.
The thing I wanted to add to this is I'm sitting with the new OHT teams.
Yes.
And if you would mind forwarding me a copy of the letter you sent to the Ministry of Health,
Yeah.
I would be more than happy to share that with the people that I know are making some differences right now.
Yeah, I think I've spoken to Kim Delahunt, who's the
Yes.
CEO of the hospital, about the fact that we are missing mental health professionals in our region, and we need to work on having more mental health professionals available. But this idea of a crisis intervention team, it would be more of a social worker with a police officer to de-escalate and to help that person rather than to put them in handcuffs and throw them in jail, right?
Yeah.
Which is
And
fortunately what happens. Yeah.
That's part of the crew that I work with, is the mental health and addiction teams.
Right.
So I'm happy to put forward anything that the town would like to kind of cover that way.
Right. Okay, so we're about 45 minutes into this right now. I've learned that if you go much longer than this, you lose the audience. So I really appreciate all of you, and I'm wondering if we could just wrap it up with a statement from each of you, just about your thoughts, kind of to wind this up. Elder Shelley, can we start with you? And I'm hoping we have to look positively at things, and we need to, as I said, continuously improve. So I kind of want to end on that, but maybe you could chat to us, Shelley, on that point.
So if we went back to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, one of the areas that we've been talking about here is the area of justice. And when I think about the pandemic, and I think about all of our service people, our officers, I would also like to consider that they are also under a great deal of stress. And
Yes.
when we think about the notion of, and I remembered it, it's cultural safety training.
Okay.
Cultural safety training is a mutual exchange of information. So if we would even could do something as simple as teaching about the circle and engaging in that circle with police officers and service people, I know that it would be such a positive place to be, because it helps to think on another level, to feel on another level, and to realize that we're all in this together. And then finally, June is in Ojibwe, we call this month Ode Minigizes. Ode is the heart. Ode Min is the strawberry. So it's called the strawberry moon. And it's called that for a number of reasons. One of them is, of course, that's when the strawberries are coming up. But it's also talking about the renewal. It's a renewal of life. It's a time when we start planting our beans and our corn and our squash. And I think that's the time that we're in right now. So as we come closer to celebrating National Aboriginal Day, those are the kinds of messages that I'd like to share. We're all in this place where we can do something that's going to affect our children, our grandchildren, 7 generations into the future. Something very positive that we can all be proud to be part of.
Right. Yeah, you're talking about renewal here, right? I mean, the renewal from the earth and what's coming out of it, and renewal of our cultural acceptance. So I hope we can, we need to work hard on this for sure. So thank you for your words. And Debbie, how about yourself? You want to say a few words to close out here?
Of course. I didn't have a chance to invite you yet, but I want to formally. In October, we're doing the first Indigenous missing and murdered Indigenous women walk. And we would love to have you and the rest of council come and walk with us as we remember our women who are no longer with us. In that, though, those are a positive thing, because when we come together, their memory is never gone.
Right.
We believe they walk with us.
Sure.
So these are awesome things. I'm constantly looking forward to working with council and keeping our relationship solid, and working with the people of the town of Orangeville to try and provide whatever education that we can. And
Right.
with Elder Shelley's help, we're hoping to move forward on a lot of other things.
Great.
So,
well, Debbie, thank you so much for joining us today. A lot of great thoughts. Thank you so much. And Joe, we'll give you the last kick at the can here. Go ahead.
Well, I thank you so much for the opportunity. And again, I'm honored to be in the presence of Elder Shelley and also Debbie and of course yourself. I'm going to piggyback on what Elder Shelley had mentioned about the renewal of life. I mean, we have gone through so much through this COVID pandemic. We are all dealing with a variety of different issues, be that personally, professionally, be that with our families, collectively within our communities, and across, of course, the community and the nation too. I feel that COVID shouldn't be an excuse for us to renew our connections and re-educate. And I think that as Elder Shelley has very kindly said, that we have opportunities here as municipal representatives. I think under your leadership, your worship, we have an opportunity here to expand some of the things that are very important to our community. And if there's an opportunity for myself and others to participate, please count us in. And I think that one other point that we need to, of course, address is, of course, an event that is coming up in September. It was postponed because of the COVID pandemic. And I'm wondering if maybe Shelley or Debbie might be able to just fill us in before we wrap up, because I know we've got limited time here.
of course.
Yeah.
Shelley will be hopefully joining us that day. September the 19th, we've moved Indigenous Peoples Day to September 19th on Shelley's recommendation. And it brings us to our, and correct me, Shelley, it's the fall equinox that we will be celebrating. It's the preparation, it's the harvest, it's all of that. And we're going to have such a great time.
Very good. That's great. Well, I'm just going to say a couple more words here. One thing that we didn't mention was things like the economy and employment, because all of these things, it's a complex issue when you're mixing in racism, mental health. Again, if you've got a good job and there's a roof over your head and food on the table and money in the bank, you're happier, you're less likely to get into difficulty, you're less likely to complain, maybe less likely to act out against people of other cultures or races. I think if you feel content in your life and safe in your life, and when there's a roof over your head and food in the fridge and money in the bank. So we need to continue to work on creating good jobs in this market. I think it's really part of this whole complex world that we live in. So I just want to touch on that for a sec. But I think this issue of racism is George Floyd's death has brought it back. I mean, I'm 61 years old now. I lived through Martin Luther King's death. The struggles at Oka. OPP have killed some Indigenous people in our province. There's been a number of issues, Black, Indigenous, that have happened. But this one seems a little bit different. It seems like it's getting a lot more attention at many levels of government and within multicultural groups of people. So all people of color that have experienced this, and whether it's being stopped unfairly by a police officer or being treated poorly at a job interview, these are all things we have to continue to shine lights on and make sure that fairness prevails instead of the color of one's skin or their culture from where they came from, right? So that's all I wanted to say, and I really we had a really nice discussion today. I know Joe and I think our council really is working towards making life better for everybody, and we will continue to do so. And I want to thank Elder Shelley Charles, Debbie Sipkema from the Dufferin County Cultural Resource Circle, and Joe Andrews, of course, Councillor Joe Andrews, and our principal here at Hubbard College. Joe, thank you so much for joining us. All the best, everybody.
Thank you.
See you soon. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.